Hi everyone, and welcome to the ViaMonstra Academy and our office hours for the ConfigMgr, MDT, and Intune community. This is where you can ask questions about pretty much anything related to Microsoft Systems Management and Infrastructure. My name is Johan, I'll be your host for the next hour. And that being said, let the questions begin. All right, let me just switch over so you can see my demo screen here, or my machine over here. Here on the Academy, we allow you to ask questions through either through the Zoom meeting, for those of you that have joined into that one, but you can also submit questions on either YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Our stream also goes out on Twitter, but there is no integration with the platform to ask questions directly on the chat on Twitter there. So the other platforms work just fine. So also, I should mention that every week the links and things that we share during the office hours, we do post back on the Academy site. So this is what it would look like if you actually have logged in to the site. But on the Academy, if you go to office hours, I've tried to search for office. This is where you have the schedule. And if you sign in here, this is also where you will see all the links and other information from previous episodes, including the recordings, if you want to rewatch some of that. While I'm waiting for some questions to come in, we do have a Shine event tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central. And it's me, Andreas, and Phil who's going to take you through basically everything peer-to-peer in Microsoft. So 2 hours on DO, branch cache, peer cache, LADBAT, connected cache, and bits for ConfigMgr and Intune environments. If you haven't booked anything in your calendar for tomorrow, by all means, I'll be happy to see you join us there. It's a good show for 2 hours here. And this, like all our other mini courses, is a free event here on the Academy. So price is just right for that one. All right. I see Mr. David Segura have already joined us here on the YouTube channel, asking if it's possible to do imaging from Azure Storage. Yes, it is. And David actually shared some of that last week during Management Summit, the Midwest Management Summit in Minneapolis. And I would not be surprised if there are more content coming up on blogs, whatnot, either today or this week here. If you already have posted something and I missed it, I'm so sorry, David. Feel free to share that link with me and I'll post it here. But other than that, there are some really good stuff coming in the OSD cloud space. For those of you who want to play around with it already, you can go to osdcloud.com and see what's available there. And this is where we start to see some more amazing stuff coming up shortly as well. So I'll put that in the chat for you. Good information. Here we go. All right. Akos had a question on YouTube. And yeah, thank you. It was a great conference. Had a fantastic 5 days with like-minded peers. That was a lot of fun, hundreds of sessions. The question is regarding cleanup after, let's see. So when doing imaging through ConfigMgr, the SMSTSLog folder is stay behind. That has been a bug for a little bit. I believe it has been fixed in either 2113. No, let's see. Not 13, 2107 or 2203 of ConfigMgr. I have seen some other folks reporting in on it. Other than that, you would have to leverage something that kicks in after the sequence has finished if you want to clean up that folder structure. That can be as simple as a scheduled task that will allow the sequence create and then automatically delete itself when it's done and do the cleanup that way. Or you can trigger some other things on the site server. Something to know when sequences finishes. Let me go over to my site server here. Um, that was not that one. Let's see. When a task sequence finishes in ConfigMgr, it always spits back a return code. Return code for success is 11171. Return code for failure is 11170. You can do things on the server side when that happens. So, for example, you can have a status filter rule kick in when the task sequence engine responds with a certain message ID. That's a good example. And you can call a script that does a cleanup of that particular device, something like that. So hopefully that bug has been fixed. If not, you have to add something on your own to clean up that folder when it's done, because it's not supposed to be there. All right. Mark is asking on LinkedIn. Remote locations uses WinPE remote locations use WinPE peer-to-peer selling to management. Well, peer-to-peer in general is there to reduce the load on a distribution point and reduce the need for the number of DPs that you have to maintain in your environment. I've seen organizations having hundreds of distribution points, even though they're just a few thousand clients. So basically, every single site have a DP, and they will basically have someone from their team, one or two people, doing pretty much nothing but managing those distribution points, trying to figure out why this week these 4 packages didn't go out to these 3 distribution points and rinse and repeat tomorrow. Peer-to-peer allow you to reduce that number heavily and simplify distribution of packages quite a bit. In a peer-to-peer scenario, the only protocol that I actually know that can share content in WinPE is branch cache. All the other technologies that are out there, they share happily in Windows, but branch cache is the only one that I know that can share in WinPE. And that's just about to speed up deployments. So example, if you have a remote location that's shown here, you deploy 20 machines. They are only going to be in the WinPE phase, each of them maybe 5-10 minutes at most. But even during that phase, they will be able to share content to each other, and you will see that you get the deployments time down quite nicely for these environments. I did put together a blog post last year, I believe it was. I was comparing branch cache and peer cache together a little bit to kind of see what performance difference it was. But what we found was we were basically deploying a bunch of machines over a WAN link. So we had remote distribution points. That was the scenario. So we were deploying machines down here. And in terms of the branch cache piece, see where I had that scenario. Yeah. So basically, these two scenarios here. When WinPE was allowed to share content during imaging, so we were deploying a bunch of machines at the same time, 25 in this case, we can actually see that the total traffic over the WAN link was only about 7 gigs. And of those 7, there was actually a little chunk that was AD stuff and ConfigMgr and MDT policy stuff. But it basically allows you to reduce the traffic on your WAN link significantly and speed up the deployment for these machines. That's sort of the selling point of of using peer-to-peer for imaging. I hope that helps. If you want more details, by all means, join us tomorrow where we're going to spend 2 hours in peer-to-peer land and dive into all these different options that are available from the Microsoft stack in regards to ConfigMgr and Intune traffic. There was a follow-up comment there to the question for PXE. So the ConfigMgr PXE responders, the built-in ones, these two here. So if I go to a site server and go to one of my DPs, the PXE configuration on those, you can have one of two responders. You can either have the one that is based on WDS or the one that is based without WDS, so the WDS-less version. But none of these PXE responders support having the boot image elsewhere. It actually have to be downloaded from the distribution point. And that means in this scenario, where you have, say that this is not a MDT server, we were running a course earlier on MDT Light Touch, so I borrowed that. But say that you have your distribution point here, so this is DPO1, and you're deploying machines over here behind a WAN link. If your PXE server is up here, so this is PXE, with the ConfigMgr responders, the boot image actually have to download over the WAN link before we can do any peer-to-peer at all. If you're using other PXE servers, like our company is selling a version of the iPXE open source PXE server, which in my opinion, and a little bit biased of course, but it's a better PXE responder than the one that comes with ConfigMgr by default. If you do that, well, you still boot from your central PXE server. You still send up a boot request and say, hey, I'm a client, I want a PXE boot, but the only thing that's going to be sent down are some netboot files, just a few hundred kilobytes. Then the machine is going to look around for local friends on that network to see if any of them have the boot image in their branch cache. And if they do, the client is going to get the boot image from a friend rather than having to download a 4, 5, 6, 700 meg boot image over the WAN link. What it effectively allows you to do is to have a central PXE server. We have organizations that we work with that have 50, 60,000 clients in thousands of locations, one central PXE server. And that is simply not doable if you're using the native responders, because that distribution point would be overwhelmed, basically, of that kind of traffic. So long answer to a short question, but I hope it kind of makes sense there. Agnes mentioned that the bug on the SMSTSLog folder still being there is apparently still in 2203. Dang it, I was hoping it'd be fixed, but all right, time to send a frown in the console, say that it's still there, and in the meantime implement something, for example, the scheduled task that I mentioned earlier, that does the cleanup for you. So yeah. All right, any other questions? Great questions. Oops, seems to have a kitten here who wants to help with the stream. I don't think we need that at the moment. I'm good anyway, thank you. Another question on LinkedIn from Mark here. How can we preload, download? So let's see here. So this is all a follow-up on the peer-to-peer question. How can one pre-down content to client and run a refresh? There's a bunch of different options for pre-caching ConfigMgr content. The most commonly used ones are to use or sequences for this. So in my environment here, I have quite a few sequences that I'm using for deployment. That was not ConfigMgr. Here is ConfigMgr. But some of these sequences are obviously just normal deployments, but I also have pre-caching only sequences. So these are sequences that actually doesn't do any install. They're just there to copy down content. And if I open up one of these sequences, like the one from my 21H2 deployment, you can see I just have a few steps in here that download packages. And the trick here is to download them into the ConfigMgr client cache. But here is the deal. These applications and these packages are never run because I have a condition on them that says never true equals true. So they're never going to run it. The only reason I have them here is so that the sequence knows about them. And that means that if I go to reference to that sequence, they are listed since I added them to the sequence. And the trick is when you deploy this sequence. So if you go to one of my deployments here, you will see that it's configured for download everything before starting. So if you do this, all is good. A second here. I have a little kitten that is eating on my computer, not recommended. Thank you. So this is how we do pre-downloads of content. There are other options available. You can have scripts, you can have packages, you can have applications that does the same thing. I just happen to like sequences. And I deploy them in such a way so the ConfigMgr client is staging them in the cache. The follow-up question, how is the download done? Is it done via bits? Yes, when you have pre-downloading your content, when you tell the sequence or deployment to download before starting a sequence, ConfigMgr is always using bits to get that content down. So you don't even have to do a separate script for it, even though you can. I've been using bit script to get, not that one, but here. Basically, when verifying that branch cache is functional, I often use just regular bits job to pre-download things. I'm clearing the cache first and starting the download later, and then verify from the event log that it actually did get all the content into the cache, etc., or from a peer. So you can definitely do that, but I just think it's simpler for if you already have sequences that you use for doing imaging. I kind of prefer to do pre-caching of sequences as well, even though by all means, if you want to script something, go ahead and do that. For our other deployment solutions, like the PowerShell deployment kit that is based on MDT, there is no agent that I can do anything with. So for those deployment solutions, I have to use pre-caching script. So here I have an example I was playing around with during MMS. Let's see where I find that machine. I have a lot of machines. These guys, number 14 and 15. They are not for ConfigMgr, but I'm basically just using pre-caching scripts that goes up to a URL and grabs everything in it and downloads all of it into the cache. Here is an example where I'm just snatching the boot image to pre-cache. So you can certainly do a lot of that through PowerShell. It doesn't have to be through a sequence. Some folks jumping in the call and wishing me a happy birthday. Yes, it is my birthday. Thank you so much for that. 25 again, I believe. Just the gray hair and the beard that kind of reveals that maybe not be exactly 25, but thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. Any other questions? There was a question coming up regarding PXE Boot. ConfigMgr cannot do PXE booting over HTTPS. If you want to leverage that capability, you have to use a different PXE responder. Doesn't have that capability, the two PXE responders that ConfigMgr has. They're still using TFTP when they download stuff. And thank you for the wishes. Yes. All right. So Dave had a question on YouTube for in-place upgrade of Windows 10. Is it now more viable to run them from the console through servicing rather than a sequence? That's more of a preference. I still love using sequences because it gives me so much control of the upgrade process. If you rather prefer to use the servicing node here in ConfigMgr, by all means do that. But what you have to combine that with is some of the control that you otherwise would use a sequence for. So for example, there will be things that you have to validate prior to a service plan kicks in, so you can deploy that as a baseline. Believe Adam Gross still has the best example for a baseline for that. See if I can find that link for you. Yeah, so his organization have been using service plans quite a bit, and he even published somewhere here a baseline. Yeah, that you can download and use for this purpose. So it is doable to use service plans by all means. I'll put this link in the chat here. That's a good starting point. It's just that you still have to do that control. And for example, when it comes to drivers, you're either going to need to update drivers or you don't need to update drivers, or you may need to remove some drivers. And all of that logic, you will simply have to find different mechanisms to deal with. So in Adam's example here, let's see where I think he had one where he actually shows the ini file. Not that one. And find the example I was looking for. I know he had one where he showed with dynamic updates and driver folders and whatnot. So, but personally, to me, I like sequences. I know them well. There are plenty of examples to borrow from, but it's completely up to you. All right, any other questions? Still have a whopping 30 minutes to go. Let's see, there is a question coming in here in the Zoom call for those of you that have joined that one. What would be the reason that machines under config manager management waited out to Windows Update for OS upgrades? Nothing was configured under service plans. The only thing I can think of is that those machines either have corrupt policies or that they somehow were configured for dual scan, and those machines were basically allowed to reach out to somebody else and ask for updates. I have seen that happening quite a bit lately, especially for organizations that are moving workloads for updates from Config Manager over to Intune, and have learned the hard way that sometimes policy settings that were supposed to be changed simply didn't. I have seen some threads going on Twitter of that recently. I know that Andrew, that I work with here in the academy, he ran into some of that he even started to blog about a little bit on that specific scenario. But that basically goes back to review those policy settings. Something I have learned organizations found useful was from 2 point here in the free gallery. There is a configuration item that you can use to detect local policy corruption, because this one can be really, really hard to figure out. And it gives you really strange errors when you're troubleshooting clients when policies are basically borked. So if you haven't seen this one, it's a good little CI that you can implement. I'll put the link in the chat for you. All right, here we go. Let's see. Question on LinkedIn from Diego about Intune. I'm deploying some device restriction policies to a bunch of Windows 10 Pro machines, but it doesn't seem to take those policies. Basically, how can I troubleshoot that? There are some pretty good guidance around configuring device configuration profiles, including that type of policies. I like to say I would probably start with checking that the policies come down correctly. And Oliver Kieselbach actually released a tool not too long ago. It's called the SyncML Viewer. It's up on GitHub. The latest version is 107. But this is a nice little tool that allows you to see in real time what's coming down to the client. And that can usually help troubleshooting a little bit. So if you haven't seen this tool, it's pretty dang amazing. I even use this to troubleshoot autopilot stuff, because if you have a client, see if I can go over to one of my Intune machines. Yeah, this one will do. Here's the tool. It has some actions that you can call to gather different type of diagnostics, or open certain registry keys, open up the policy manager where policies lives from Intune, or open up the provisioning one where, provisioning lives, all of that kind of stuff. But you can also see every single message that is coming down to these clients, and it gives you some details about those messages as well. So that one can be helpful for troubleshooting. Other than that, gather diagnostics log. You have that option in Access Worker School. It's been there for a good while to grab extra information on the machine. There's the server side of this as well, of course, where you from the Intune console can, as an admin, you can ask for log files from the client. And recently that has actually been quite much faster and allows for larger log files. So now it's only 10-20 minutes until I get the log files. Earlier it could take a good hour to get stuff. But if you basically do a search for troubleshooting and Intune, there are so many great blog posts that takes you through uh, that journey. Uh, Another option, of course, shameless plug, you can definitely jump onto one of our Intune courses here in the Academy and we'll show you how it's done. But other than that, the community is a great starting point. All right, so Mark is asking on LinkedIn, is MDT integration to ConfigMgr still widely used? It depends on how you kind of frame that question. Organizations who previously had the integration, they typically still use it because they often have invested a lot of stuff in it. But for newer implementations or when there are new people coming into ConfigMgr and are supposed to work with OSD, the trend in general is to move away from the full-blown MDT integration over to something that is often referred to as MDT Lite, where you basically just have a PowerShell script that does what some of the functions you wanted to have in MDT does. So I can show you just the difference here for those of you who haven't seen it before. But if I go to one of my normal sequences here, let's see, sort by name. So this is a sequence that is integrated with MDT. And you will see it has like almost 100 different actions in it. Whereas a native sequence in ConfigMgr without the integration only has like 30 or 25 or whatever it is. But here you can see an example where I've taken one of the most used functions in MDT, the gather function, and I'm using a PowerShell script to run that as well. And in this case, I was actually extra optimistic because I actually added that file into WinPE. So I always would have it available no matter what, no matter if there was a format volume on the hard drive or not. I'm just calling that script. And that script is written by Johan Shrevelius. It's, I think I have a copy. Let's see where I put that one. Let's gather, yeah. So it's just a PowerShell version of the MDT script that simply gets a lot of information about the machine, information that you were used to get from the MDT integration, but now you just have a PowerShell script that retrieves the same info there. So great contribution. You can download it from his webpage or the OneWid website. It's right there. Let's see. Uh, There are plenty of community folks that have, so as a follow-up comment to that question about the MDT integration, there are plenty of community folks that have dived into and ported over functionality from the MDT sequences over to the native sequences. Something to know regarding the MDT integration is that MDT haven't received updates in years, and it doesn't look good on the updating point either. So what's there works great, but it's almost exclusively in the VB script. And usually the VB script knowledge around the globe is not the best. And it's definitely not something that someone that is new into IT would start to invest a lot of time learning. Instead, they would go ahead and learn PowerShell. So it does make sense to move over more stuff over to PowerShell. But what there works, there is almost 300 some functions on top of ConfigMgr OSD. And if you're using a bunch of them already, it can actually be quite the work to port them over to PowerShell, but uh, it's not an overwhelming task. It's just work that has to be done. Dave had a question on YouTube regarding the console being stuck in downloading state, or that the update that's been stuck downloading state for a good 2 weeks now. Uh, and the question is basically, I've never seen an update get stuck like that before. Well, it's actually quite common, and I've seen it a lot. Uh, Often a retry goes a long way. Sometimes just restarting the executive service gets it going. So basically on the site server itself, uh, uh, go to this one here and give it a bump, and it usually kicks in. One of the most common reasons I've seen for upgrades not behaving is third-party antivirus software trying to scan that folder, because the payload is actually coming down inside of the install folder in ConfigMgr. This is where you will see the easy setup payload coming in eventually when you do your downloads. And of course, it will eventually move over when this setup is done into the CD.latest. But I have seen content just simply not coming down to this one because some antivirus is very aggressively scanning that content. Uh, there is also a reset tool that you can use for the update that allow you to start over. So if it doesn't help by removing your antivirus software or restarting the service, you can try to sort of restart the setup again. So there are options available, and it does happen every now and then that an upgrade gets stuck, even though it has been better over the years in general. So yeah. Else. Another question regarding ConfigMgr and MDT, and that was basically using MDT to do build and capture and feed it to ConfigMgr. Yes, highly recommended if you still need to build thick images. But there is also a trend, a shift in the industry in where a lot of organizations are trying to move away from having thick images into thin images. And if you do that, there is absolutely no need to go through a build and capture process anymore. You can just download whatever Microsoft have provides and just use that for your deployment. And then you do all your settings, applications, and other type of things at deployment time rather than putting them in the image. But there are still many organizations out there who absolutely must use thick images to be able to meet their SLAs, to be able to re-image a classroom over lunch, something like that. And for those that still needs them, I highly recommend using MDT to build those because it's very, very easy to automate. There are ready-made image factory solutions for it, and then you take the result, put in ConfigMgr, and deploy out in production. It's more like it's more about automation. Uh, as an example, if I need a new thick image in my lab, I will open up a PowerShell prompt. I will navigate myself to a folder that I'm trying to type the correct name to. And I simply run a script. And I walk away. Half an hour later, I have a thick image up on a file share. This is Image Factory. But again, if you don't need it, you don't need it. And by all means, if you haven't evaluated it in a while, your reference image, do that Because I've talked to organizations who say, oh, we must have one because it takes forever if you don't have a thick image. Like, really, can you show me the time difference? And they will show me the difference, and okay, it's 3 minutes. It's really worth saving 3 minutes worth of time to build and capture reference images? Probably not. But it could be that they're still doing it because 3 minutes now was 30 minutes 5 years ago. Hardware is better, network is better, SSD drives, better CPUs, all that good stuff. So yeah, a follow-up comment there was if it is a thin image, I just want to emphasize there's absolutely no point of do a build and capture in MDT. If you're using thin images, you have a few different options. The simplest one is probably just exporting it from a WIM file that you get from Microsoft. Here's an example that I have been using um, for Windows 10 that simply mounts an ISO file and exports the index that I want. Here is an example for Windows 11. Same story here. Download the ISO, export the index that I want. You can use other solutions like OSD Builder that will create you an updated WIM file that is thin. You can use WimWitch from Donna. Um, Same story there. Will create you a good WIM file, but it's still thin. And when it's still thin, it means that you can use it not just for bare metal deployment, but you can also use that same image for servicing scenarios, which is nice. Want to play around with these scripts? By all means, they are up on my GitHub repository, deployment research, DR files. Here you'll find a lot of my scripts that I've played around with over the years, but here are the ones that I showed you for the export. Looks like I didn't upload my Windows 11 one, but that I can do. Let's see. Set up scripts, export, copy, GitHub, your files, scripts, paste, GitHub desktop, not that one, but this one. Perfect. Great stuff. So that one should be available as well now, if all goes well. Yeah, there you have them. So I put that link in the chat here. And again, all the links that I'm posting in the chat, we will publish here on the Academy. If not today, so tomorrow morning. But they will show up under the office hours link here on the site. George, who is one of the contributors here on the PowerShell deployment kit that we worked on for a good while, is just mentioning on LinkedIn that in ConfigMgr, one technique is to install the line of business app during the sequence, and then others later when the machine actually shows up that's fully managed in the ConfigMgr environment, having a client, whatnot. And yes, that is a very common scenario. Organizations are basically maintaining different lists of apps for different departments, and they make sure that the most important ones are installed during deployment by the sequence, and then they take the other apps further down the road. That's also an option, of course. All right. Let's see. Another question coming in on LinkedIn here. It's taking a long time to install CU and an update each month where you don't need build and capture. Well, just because you use a thin image, it doesn't mean that you should use an old thin image. It should always be an updated image. So Microsoft are releasing ISO files every month. I recommend to export the index from them every month and add to ConfigMgr. Still no need for build and capture, but just making sure that your media is always a fully patched media, even though it's a thin one. If you don't have access to downloading these ISO files every month, that's when you can use OSD Builder or WimWitch to bring up that media to a patched level so that when you are deploying it, it is already patched and there is no need to have the sequence to do something else because that is very time consuming. It's will just add another 4, 5, 600 meg that you have to download rather than having it inside of the image. So that's my recommendation. Even though it sounds a bit daunting maybe to update images every month, I recommend doing so, especially for servicing. Because Microsoft does updates not just to Windows itself from a security point of view, they also provide updates to setup itself. So we have customers where they are getting failures during servicing for the very fact that we're using an older media. Where if they had used the latest media, the problem was basically went away. Even for offline scenarios, there was a follow-up comment there, being on an isolated network, how to deal with this. Uh, if you really want to put your heart into it, you can definitely download updates manually, stage them, and move them over to sort of an isolated network and patch them that way. But in that case, it's probably easier to just get the ISO from Microsoft on a machine that actually does have internet access, export the WIM file, and bring it over to this isolated environment. It's always rough if you don't have internet access available for this. All right, any other questions? We have a whooping 12 minutes to go. For those of you that arrived a little bit later, I would like to remind you that tomorrow morning we are hosting a free session on maximizing Windows 10 network performance or Windows 11 network performance. So that's a good 2 hours on fun peer-to-peer stuff between 9 and 11 Central Time. So if you haven't that in a calendar, highly recommend it. All right, any other questions? Looking here in the Q&A, don't see any coming in. Don't see any in the chat either. All right then, I don't see any more questions coming in. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. We'll get the links posted shortly. And if I not see you tomorrow, I hope to see you again next Wednesday. Thank you so much. Have a good one.